Well, good evening and welcome to our Friday night Bible study.
Good
This,
evening.
hi,
You have a
uh,
voice.
this is for Friday, November 29th, 2024. That means it's the day after Thanksgiving in the United States. The United States, there are other nations that celebrate Thanksgiving, but they celebrate it on a different day. The United States has chosen the fourth Thursday in November. And this year that makes today the next to last day of the month, meaning that December will begin on Sunday, which of course then means that it'll have a Friday the 13th. Uh, Not that that's a big deal for us, just that's one of the features of a month that begins on Sunday. And I'm thinking that our weather has changed enough that I probably should have switched shirts out in the closet last week and started wearing my long sleeve shirts, but I haven't done that yet. So I'm still wearing the short sleeve shirts instead of the long sleeve. Don't spend as much time outside as I used to, so that's not as big an issue. But you do have to take care of the garbage and things like that. And I probably should have hauled off corrugated this week and didn't do it. So our house is getting a little bit plugged up with corrugated that needs to be taken out and recycled. And I think one of the reasons I've been delaying doing that is that they made it a whole bunch harder. They used to have the corrugated bin under a roof at the waste transfer station so they could have an open top and you could just heave your folded box, your flattened out boxes over the rail down into the bin, which was an improvement over what they had before that. Because before that, they just had a place you put them here. There was no bin there. But then they decided they needed to move the bin and do something else with that space. So then they needed to cover the bin. Well, yeah, that's sensible. Uh, Corrugated won't do well if it gets wet, so it's got to be covered if it's out in the weather. Um, but the cover had such small holes that most of the boxes that I haul out wouldn't fit through the holes without being folded over. So it was, you know, it took me 3, 4, 5 times as long to get rid of my corrugated as it used to. So, but it needs to be done. So,
Um, can you pause
yeah, just a moment.
the battery?
Okay, get that little matter taken care of. We have a game controller that does not have rechargeable batteries. It has replaceable batteries. Well, generally, I use a voltmeter and I check batteries, and if they're 1 1/4 volts or more, I keep them and use them some more. But this thing wouldn't take them. I had to have brand new batteries or it wouldn't light up, which means it may be uh, chucking out batteries before they're really used. I don't.
Yeah, I wish I'd never bought the thing. I mean, I needed one that would was wireless, but
Yeah,
I didn't realize this thing couldn't be charged.
yeah. We had chargeable ones before, and the problem is the chargeable ones used a dongle, a USB dongle to connect to the computer. This one uses Bluetooth, so it doesn't have to have the dongle because it connects directly to the computer's Bluetooth facility. Um, so that's nice because then the dongle sticking out of the back of the computer. Usually it's fairly long and it's prone to being bumped, and then that breaks the connections inside the thing, and now you've lost a $60-$70 controller for the 10-cent dongle that connects it to the computer, which can be aggravating. But so it'd be nice if we could find a wireless one that has a rechargeable battery that uses Bluetooth where you don't have to have the dongle. That would be the best of all worlds. They probably figure out that's what people want, and so they would charge, instead of $70 for the controller, they'll want $140 for the controller. Double the price because people want it. That's our commerce system. They will tell you in economics classes, I should say, that the price for something is whatever the market will bear. So you have desirable real estate and not so desirable real estate. The price for the real estate isn't based on its potential productivity, it's based on its desirability. So you get near a big city and the prices can be well more than double what they are in smaller towns just because people want to live near the big city, particularly out in the suburbs. Right downtown, they don't want to live there, although if you live in a nice enough apartment right downtown, you can pay literally thousands of dollars a month to rent a place like that. It's insane.
I tend to grind my teeth when I sleep, and the dentist told me I needed to get a brace to stop me from grinding my teeth. And it was going to cost, I think, about $1,300. Well, I don't have $1,300. So I got on the phone and I called my son's aunt. And I told her I needed a miracle. Well, the reason I called her is that she's an orthodontist. And she gave me the miracle. She told me to go to Walmart into the athletic department and purchase a moldable athletic mouthpiece. And she said it would only cost me $1. And I didn't, I don't know what they cost now, but she was right. At the time, she was right. It only cost me $1. We found the exact same thing, just had a little bit different label. It was being sold as a dental device, and the price was, I believe it was $14. You go to the athletic department and spend $1. You go into the medical department and spend $14. Exact same item.
Yeah. Everybody knows that medical devices cost way more than what it costs the companies to produce them, just because the market will bear it. And one of the reasons that the market will bear it is what was otherwise a pretty good idea, was having insurance to cover your medical costs. The thing is, now the consumer doesn't say, I'm not buying that, it costs too much. The insurance pays for it, so the consumer just goes ahead and gets it because it's not coming out of his pocket per se. I mean, it is, but it's not direct, and that delinkage gave the medical device providers the opening, and the medical service providers for that matter, the opening they needed to jack up their costs. For years, hospitals were charities. They ran at a loss. They were run by either government entities who said, we need this service for our citizens and we're willing to pay for it, or by churches. Churches still run hospitals. But today, hospitals are centers of profit. The religions that do these get money out of them. the companies that run hospitals make money from them. Anyway, that's just a general complaint about life in a broken world, and about the there are pluses, but there are also drawbacks to our system of commerce. I guess that's kind of what we're saying. So, and before we actually get into our study, I wanted to point this out. 20 or more years ago, the BBC, and that stands for the British Broadcasting Company, produced a television show titled British Men Behaving Badly. Do you remember that?
I tried to watch it. It was too bad.
Yeah.
It was too raunchy.
We used to watch the they call them Britcoms, British situation comedy shows that would be played on public television here in the United States on Saturday night towards Sunday morning.
When I say it was too raunchy for me, I don't tend to be somebody who's particularly interested in being Victorian about what I see on television. It's got to be pretty raunchy for me to turn it off.
Yeah.
And it was too bad for me. So, yeah, I remember it. I watched most of one episode and
just got turned off to the whole thing.
When I saw a guy describing his best friend, and then he held his hand up to show that his best friend was his right hand.
Yeah.
That was a little more than that wasn't humorous.
Right.
Not to me.
Well, at any rate, the reason I bring that up is because the book in the Bible that we're getting into tonight could be titled Israelite Men Behaving Badly. Now, granted, that's kind of a description of the entire Old Testament, but this book in particular tells about a lot of things that involve people being human and behaving badly, doing terrible things. And as we cover it, we want to make the point that, like much of the Old Testament, this book is mostly just going to tell us what happened, and is not as interested as, say, the books of Chronicles in telling us this was good and this was bad. It's just, this is what happened. Now, there will be some places where we're going to read things that they attribute particular motives to God that we are going to say, no, that wasn't God's motive. And we're going to say that based on our understanding of the life, teaching, and death of Jesus, and our belief that the character of God is most clearly revealed to us on the cross of Christ, and therefore anything in the Bible that is contrary to that revelation, we have to understand differently. So, with that being said, I think maybe we'll bow our heads and we'll get into our study this evening. Our Father in heaven, we thank you for your blessings. We thank you for bringing us through this past week, and for making life possible and at times even enjoyable. And now we're going to take some time apart to open the written word and to ponder who you are, what you're like, and whether or not we can trust you. We want the Holy Spirit to be part of this exercise so that each individual can take away from it that which that person most needs. We ask in Jesus' name. Amen. So, here we are in Judges chapter 3. We read the first two chapters last week after having completed the book of Joshua and reading Joshua's charge to the people shortly before his death at 110, which was still a fairly lengthy life at the time. So this one starts out, and the very first passage here is going to be rather problematic for us. At least it was for me, as I got a clearer and clearer understanding of God's character. I would get to this passage and it would grate at me. Is this really what God is like? Is this really what God wants? And it was thanks in part to the ideas in the book Crucifixion of the Warrior God, because it's a warrior God that's about to be presented here, that I was able to understand, no, this isn't what God is like, and the people who write this are writing what they think, not necessarily what really happened. So it starts out saying that these are the nations that the Lord left in the land to test those Israelites who had not experienced the wars of Canaan. And we say, wait a minute, what? And then if you go on to the second verse, it gets even worse. He did this to teach warfare to generations of Israelites who had no experience in battle. Now, if your mindset is that you live in a world of continuous warfare and everybody, every generation needs experience in battle in order to protect your country, then you might imagine your God doing things specifically to keep your warriors, quotes, in practice and ready to protect your nation. But that is a form of focus on self and personal survival. I need people to be ready to go out and sacrifice their own survival so that I can survive this terribly violent world.
Can I say something?
Sure.
During the night, I was thinking along the lines of what you're saying and how people tend to look at God as being just and loving, yet he ordered the death of all these people. And I'm thinking that can't be right. If you stop and bring your thoughts to our criminal system, if you hire somebody to kill somebody else, who's the killer? The killer would be the one who actually goes out and pulls the trigger and takes somebody's life. Now, who is it that's responsible for the death? It would be the person who desired the killing and put somebody up to it.
Yeah.
The one who bears the most responsibility in the death is the one who contacted the assassin and made the payment. So according to what we're being taught by the church, God is the one who wants the death, and he's using people to be assassins. This is not an act of love. So what is it? Is it accurate? No.
It's the perception and understanding of a group of people who live in such a violent world that warfare is the only way for a nation to survive. So God is for us. God is here to protect us. Therefore, God wants us to be warriors. And that is very clearly the meaning of these first two verses. The Lord left these nations in the land to test those Israelites who had not experienced the wars of Canaan. He did this to teach warfare to generations of Israelites who had no experience in battle. And yet later in the Old Testament, we read the passage that the Creator, through his prophet, says that they will turn their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks, and that they would study war no longer. So there we get a picture of God that is not presented in these verses, leading us to think that these verses are actually misleading us about what God really wants. And then it goes on to say, these are the nations, the Philistines, those living under the 5 Philistine rulers, all the Canaanites, the Sidonians, and the Hivites living in the mountains of Lebanon, from Mount Baal Hermon to Lebo-Hamath, and later in the Bible, Hermon will be used without the Baal in front of it. These people were left to test the Israelites to see whether they would obey the commands the Lord had given to their ancestors through Moses. God's going to tempt you, is essentially what it's saying, to see if you'll do the right thing. He'll put you under stress to see if you'll obey. Except that the New Testament says God does not tempt or test anyone. So, if the Old Testament writer says God wanted to test the Israelites, test and tempt are essentially the same thing in biblical languages, then it's contradicting what the New Testament tells us about the character of God. So the people of Israel lived among the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 of the 7. Although there are, when we read this list, it changes from time, but this list is perhaps the most common list of the nations that the Israelites displaced as they entered what we today call Canaan or Israel. And they intermarried with them. Israelite sons married their daughters, and Israelite daughters were given in marriage to their sons, and the Israelites served their gods. Now, throughout the Old Testament, we're going to see this link. The link between intermarriage and idolatry. And certainly, by the time that you get to the days of Ezra and Nehemiah and the return from the Babylonian captivity, those Israelites, now mostly Jews, did have that very strong perception that intermarriage caused idolatry, therefore intermarriage was bad. That despite the specific intermarriages that we're going to read about in the following books that did not result in idolatry. The problem with idolatry is idolatry, worshiping a false god. Has nothing to do with who you're married. Although if you are prone to idolatry, it might be appropriate to be careful about who you marry so that your spouse does not lead you into idolatry. And the thing is, and I'll tell you about an illustration that somebody did with this. Why would they see intermarriage as always leading to idolatry instead of, as in the case of Ruth, an opportunity to proselytize people into your own religion? Now, I'm going to tell you about this illustration, just not necessarily to say I think it's right, but there might be an element to it that's instructive. So this was when I was in high school. It was at a high school in Idaho, a boarding high school there. And they were having they called it a week of prayer, a week of spiritual emphasis, where they would bring in an outside speaker to present a series of lectures, religious lectures, to the students. And this particular lecturer, was talking about the issue of intermarriage, specifically intermarriage with people who were not members of that specific denomination. And the illustration was, he thought that people of that specific denomination were on a higher level and a higher plane than people of other denominations. You can see now why I'm saying that this, I find this thinking a bit problematic. I'm better than you, so don't marry him because you're better than him. That is not a healthy thing to teach young people, but that's what they taught. And the very practical illustration that he gave was, he brought a young lady up on stage, one of the students, and he got a chair and he had her stand on the chair. And he told her, "Now I want you to get me up on the chair with you. I will not resist you." And so she pulled on him, and he just let his arms go up so that her grip on him slipped, and she tried for a while, was unable to pull him up on the chair. And then, because they were, quotes, married, he had her hold his hand, and he keeps right on talking about things, and all of a sudden he gives her hand a little jerk, and pop, she comes right down off the chair. His illustration being, it's a whole lot easier to go down than it is to go up. And so his reason for teaching against intermarriage was, if you're better than them, it's easier for them to bring you down than it is for you to bring them up. Well, again, that's a sectarian viewpoint. However, there is some truth to that, given our fallen human nature. And that is the problem with the intermarriage that's being described here. The Israelites were supposed to worship the Creator, non-destructive God. They didn't entirely, but the theory is that God believed it was better to worship a creator God that occasionally got angry and violent than to worship the gods of the nations who approved of violence, and that's how they lived. So, take the better route. But in that case, then, their worship of a creator was an improvement over the worship of the peoples around them, and there may have been some element to that illustration where it was easier for the peoples around them to pull them down to their level than it would have been for them to bring their spouses up to their level, to even their limited understanding of a creator God. And we know that last sentence there in verse 6, and the Israelites served their gods, that's going to be the problem that crops up throughout this book, and indeed throughout the rest of Old Testament history until the return from the Babylonian captivity. The Israelites were drawn to the worship of these other false gods because of, some think, the attractiveness of those worship ceremonies, particularly those that mingled sex with worship. And the idea which gets strengthened in these false religions, that you engage God in a transactional relationship, that you engage with him transactionally. The better the thing you give him, the better the benefit you get from him. So what better gift to give God than to offer your children through the harem, that is, giving something to God by totally destroying it. And so you have the passages where the Israelites caused their children to pass through the fire to these false gods.
There's other ways of doing attempting transaction religion by transactional relationship.
Well, yes.
Explaining the promises.
Yes.
Oh God, I did this, so therefore you have to do this. And here's the text in the Bible to prove you have to do it.
Yeah. A very human legal approach. Here's the case law. Now you have to do this for me.
What if he does it for you and it's something that really was not in your best interest? You going to get mad at God for giving what you demanded?
So.
It removes the trust element.
Right. So now we get on to the first of the named judges, and that's Othniel. And recall, out of the book of Joshua, we learned that Othniel was the both nephew and son-in-law to Caleb. So verse 7 tells us the Israelites did evil in the Lord's sight. They forgot about the Lord their God, and they served the images of Baal and the Asherah poles. Now that the Asherah pole is essentially a phallic symbol. Then the Lord burned with anger against Israel, and he turned them over to King Cushan-Rishathaim of Aram Naharaim. That's a couple of really tough names. And the Israelites served Cushan-Rishathaim for 8 years. Footnote A down here. Aram Naharaim means Aram of the two rivers, thought to have been located between the Euphrates and Bali rivers in northwestern Mesopotamia. So we think that. So the Israelites served somebody else for 8 years. But when the people of Israel cried out to the Lord for help, the Lord raised up a rescuer to save them. His name was Othniel, the son of Caleb's younger brother Kenaz. The Spirit of the Lord came upon him, and he became Israel's judge. He went to war against King Cushan-Rishathaim of Aram, and the Lord gave Othniel victory over him. Now, when it says of Aram, who were the Arameans? Well, the Arameans were the relatives of Abraham who stayed behind as he made his journey from the Chaldean territory, Ur of the Chaldeans, toward the Promised Land. He came so far and set up there at the place known as Haran. and then that became the Aramean nation. So they're essentially going to war against their close relatives. The Lord, it says, gave Othniel victory over him. Well, the Lord may have acted to protect, and then how they went about executing their protection was up to them. So there was peace in the land for 40 years. Then Othniel, son of Kenaz, died. Once again, the Israelites did evil in the Lord's sight, and the Lord gave King Eglon of Moab control over Israel because of their evil. Now, this is true to the extent of the Old Covenant. If you don't do what's right, if you don't obey my rules, I'll give you over to your enemies, was the Old Covenant arrangement. And so this is what's going on.
I'm not going to agree with that. I'm sorry. I think that needs to be rephrased.
I'll rephrase it then.
You don't live within the boundaries of the laws that I've set up, then this is the natural consequence of what's going to happen to you.
But then why is the old? If you try to make the Old Covenant positive like that, why does it need to be replaced? Because in the New Testament we read that the Old Covenant gets replaced, that it is worthless, that it doesn't work. You see the point I'm making?
No.
The New Testament talks about the Old Covenant and says it's worthless. It had to be replaced. Jesus came to replace it with something that was better, that was more glorious, that worked.
Okay. The Old Covenant is a case of follow the rules and I will protect you. The New Covenant is live your life in a way that the rules will be automatically a part of who you are. Therefore, you won't have to suffer the consequences of what happens when you follow the rules based on a list of rules.
Okay, yeah, and the point of the New Covenant is who's making the promise. The Old Covenant is founded on God's promise, or on the people's promise to obey the rules. The New Covenant is based on God's promise to fix us so that we naturally obey the rules. We do what's right because it's right.
We need to follow the God's covenant.
Right.
You know, when you said Old Covenant, I think I was thinking of a covenant going back before the law was given to Moses, the written law.
No, when I say Old Covenant, I'm talking about the covenant with Israel that was expressed at the giving of the Ten Commandments. Everything the Lord has said we will do, we will obey.
Yeah.
And then the Old Covenant being, God says, you obey my rules, I'll bless you. You disobey my rules, I'll curse you. That's the foundation of the Old Covenant, and that's what's being expressed here. They disobeyed, they did evil in the Lord's sight, and the Lord gave this foreign king control over them because of that evil.
But I wouldn't say that the Lord did it. He just pulled back his protection.
Well,
and the evil king came and took over.
That's exactly our point. However, what's being expressed here, the way it's being said, is founded on the Israelite understanding of the Old Covenant. God did this to us because we didn't do the right thing.
And that's legalistic.
Yeah. That's the problem with the Old Covenant. It's legalistic. Eglon enlisted the Ammonites and Amalekites as allies.
God's character.
Okay, I was reading so they couldn't hear you.
It's based on a misunderstanding of God's character.
Yeah, absolutely. Eglon enlisted the Ammonites. That's the children of one of Lot's sons. And the Amalekites. We've gone over the Amalekites several times. As allies, and then he went out and defeated Israel, taking possession of Jericho, the city of palms. Now, the Amalekites were the descendants of Esau's concubine, were they not? I keep forgetting that. Let me go look back in Genesis real quick. No, the Amalekites were the descendants of the concubine of Esau's son Eliphaz. So it wasn't Esau's concubine, it was Esau's son's concubine. At any rate, these two people joined with Moab. Recall that Moab and Ammon are the two sons of Lot and all that sort of story. And then he went out and defeated Israel, taking possession of Jericho, the city of palms. And the Israelites served Eglon of Moab for 18 years. So the first time it was 8 years, now it's 18. But when the people of Israel cried out to the Lord for help, the Lord again raised up a rescuer to save them. His name was Ehud, son of Gera, a left-handed man of the tribe of Benjamin. And we're going to get to something rather grisly here, so, cover your ears if you have a problem with it. The Israelites sent Ehud to deliver their tribute money to King Eglon of Moab. So Ehud made a double-edged dagger that was about a foot long, and the footnote there tells us that the Hebrew term is uncertain in how long it was. The foot is a guess based on the rest of the story. And he strapped it to his right thigh, keeping it hidden under his clothing. He brought the tribute money to Eglon, who was very fat. That's understandable. In that day and age, fat people were probably relatively rare because of the necessity of strenuous physical labor for life. You had to go out and work the fields and tend the animals in order to have food. So few people got fat because they were working it off. However, Ehud, he became a ruler. And as a ruler, then he didn't have to do that hard physical labor. Other people did it for him. And he could sit in his palace and eat and possibly even overeat until he was overweight, very fat. So he was probably morbidly obese. After delivering the payment, Ehud started home with those who had helped him carry the tribute. But when Ehud reached the stone idols near Gilgal, he turned back. He came to Eglon and said, "I have a secret message for you." So the king commanded his servants, "Be quiet," and he sent them all out of the room. Ehud walked over to Eglon, who was sitting alone in a cool upstairs room, and Ehud said, "I have a message from God for you." Again, we're going to see their perception of God. As King Eglon rose from his seat, Ehud reached with his left hand, remember he was left-handed, pulled out the dagger strapped to his right thigh, and plunged it into the king's belly. The dagger went so deep that the handle disappeared beneath the king's fat. So Ehud did not pull out the dagger, and the king's bowels emptied. Footnote C, and it came out behind. All right. just for the fun of it. Let's see how another version might put that. Even the handle sank in after the blade, which came out his back. That's the NIV version. And
car drove by. I didn't hear what you said.
well, the NIV says it came out his back. That's how they rendered that particular Hebrew phrase. I was looking for my, here it is, my New American Standard Bible, which is a little more literal in its translation, just to see how they put it.
Now there are, if I could be, I very well could be wrong about this, but is there not more than one definition of bowels when you're speaking of the human anatomy?
Yeah. Okay, here's the New American Standard Bible. The handle also went in after the blade, and the fat closed over the blade. For he did not draw the sword out of his belly, and the refuse came out. So that...
What came out?
The refuse, R-E-F-U-S-E.
Entrails?
Well, I don't know. This one says the king's bowels empty.
Or brown matter?
Hard to say. Then Ehud closed and locked the doors of the room and escaped down the latrine. Now there's a footnote there for that. And went out through the porch. The meaning of the Hebrew is uncertain. All right. After Ehud was gone, the king's servants returned and found the doors to the upstairs room locked. They thought he might be using the latrine in the room, so they waited. But when the king didn't come out after a long delay, they became concerned and got a key. And when they opened the doors, they found their master dead on the floor. While the servants were raiding, Ehud escaped, passing the stone idols on his way to Sirah. When he arrived in the hill country of Ephraim, Ehud sounded a call to arms. Then he led a band of Israelites down from the hills. "Follow me," he said, "for the Lord has given you victory over Moab, your enemy." So they followed him, and the Israelites took control of the shallow crossings of the Jordan River across from Moab, preventing anyone from crossing. They attacked the Moabites and killed about 10,000 of their strongest and most able-bodied warriors. Not one of them escaped. So Moab was conquered by Israel that day, and there was peace in the land for 80 years. So we had 8 and 40 before, now we had 18 and 80. After Ehud, Shamgar, son of Anath, rescued Israel. He once killed 600 Philistines with an ox goad. And this is one of the first mentions in the Old Testament of a long-standing feud between Israel and Philistia. So this person, and we don't give any times for it. It says he rescued Israel, and it's implied because it says he once killed 600 Philistines with an ox goad, that he delivered them from the Philistines, but it doesn't say a whole lot directly. I mean, it's just this one verse for one man's whole life.
Was he one of the mighty men?
No. He's just one of the judges that's listed. And we don't even get a time period for this. How long was that? Was that part of the 80 years? Or was there a period of captivity followed by another period of peace for Shamgar that's just not given to us? I couldn't tell you. Moving on to chapter 4. After Ehud's death, the Israelites again did evil in the Lord's sight. So the Lord turned them over to King Jabin of Hazor, a Canaanite king. The commander of his army was Sisera, who lived in Harosheth-Hagoyim. Sisera, who had 900 iron chariots, ruthlessly oppressed the Israelites for 20 years. Then the people of Israel cried out to the Lord for help. We could ponder, why does it seem to keep taking longer? I mean, first it was 8 years, then it was 18 years, now it's 20 years. Why is it taking longer for them to figure out, wait a minute, we've got a problem here, we need to go ask God to help us out? Did it have to do with a lack of trust? Did it have to do with how long they thought these false gods were their protection, and take them a longer each time to figure out that these false gods didn't protect them? Deborah, the wife of Lapidoth, was a prophet who was judging Israel at that time. She would sit under the palm of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim, and the Israelites would go to her for judgment. Now, the strong impression we get from this language is that the role of judge involved something very similar to what we look to judges for in our day, and that is to settle disputes. So the people of Israel would come to this prophet and seek and present their disputes to her, and then, because they believed at least that she had a connection with divinity, she would use her wisdom and her connection to issue judgments that hopefully were more or less just. And she had her courtroom, so to speak, under the palm of Deborah. One day she sent for Barak, son of Abinoam, who lived in Kadesh in the land of Naphtali. She said to him, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, commands you. Call out 10,000 warriors from the tribes of Naphtali and Zebulun at Mount Tabor. And I will call out Sisera, commander of Jabin's army, along with his chariots and warriors, to the Kishon River. There I will give you victory over him." Barak told her, "I will go, but only if you go with me." A lot of people like to try to make some sort of moralistic interpretation of this element of the story, particularly given what Deborah then tells him. "Very well," she replied, "I will go with you, but you will receive no honor in this venture, for the Lord's victory over Sisera will be at the hands of a woman." Now, you have to understand that in the male-dominated culture of the time, for a woman to get the glory of the battle was a great shame for the man who should have gotten the glory for the battle. So Deborah went with Barak to Kadesh. At Kadesh, Barak called together the tribes of Zebulun and Naphtali, and 10,000 warriors went up with him. Deborah also went with him. Now Heber, the Kenite, a descendant of Moses' brother-in-law Hobab, had moved away from the other members of his tribe and pitched his tent by the oak of Zananim, or Zonanim, I think is how that should be pronounced, near Kadesh. When Sisera was told that Barak, son of Abinoam, had gone up to Mount Tabor, he called for all 900 of his iron chariots and all of his warriors, and they marched from Harosheth-Hagoyim to the Kishon River. Then Deborah said to Barak, "Get ready. This is the day the Lord will give you victory over Sisera, for the Lord is marching ahead of you." Now you might wonder, why was that bit there about Heber the Kenite mentioned? Well, if you don't know, we'll find out very soon. When Barak attacked, the Lord threw Sisera and all his chariots and warriors into a panic. Sisera leaped down from his chariot and escaped on foot. Then Barak chased the chariots and the enemy army all the way to Harosheth Hagoyim, killing all of Sisera's warriors. Not a single one was left alive. Meanwhile, Sisera ran to the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite. Now we know why it's mentioned. He wasn't living with the other Kenites who were allies to Israel. He was living in his own separate area, and Sisera came there, and, oh, well, she's not an Israelite, so I'll go see her. And he did this, it says, because Heber's family was on friendly terms with King Jabin of Hazor. So, yeah, the Kenites were allies to Israel, but they also made an alliance apparently with this King Jabin. Jael went out to meet Sisera and said to him, "Come into my tent, sir, come in. Don't be afraid." So he went into her tent, and she covered him with a blanket. "Please give me some water," he said, "I'm thirsty." So she gave him some milk from a leather bag and covered him again. "Stand at the door of the tent," he told her. "If anybody comes and asks you if there's anyone here, say no." But when Sisera fell asleep from exhaustion, Jael quietly crept up to him with a hammer and tent peg in her hand. Then she drove the tent peg through his temple and into the ground, and so he died. When Barak came looking for Sisera, Jael went out to meet him. She said, "Come, and I will show you the man you are looking for." So he followed her into the tent and found Sisera laying there dead with the tent peg through his temple. Gruesome, I know. So on that day, Israel saw God defeat Jabin, the Canaanite king, and from that time on, Israel became stronger and stronger against King Jabin until they finally destroyed him. 4:11, father-in-law, yeah. Oh, that's interesting. Hobab, brother-in-law instead of father-in-law. Well, I think we can be fairly certain that. Well, I don't know. You know, the father, the man, the priest of Midian, to whom Moses allied himself after he fled Egypt, has several names, such as Jethro, and he's called something else in Exodus when he meets, I think it's Exodus, it might be in Numbers, where he meets Moses and tells him he's wearing himself out by doing all the judgment. He needs to name subordinate judges to take the easier cases, so that only the harder cases came to him. And yeah, I'll have to admit my memory isn't that great. I don't remember what names are used where, but this name Hobab might refer to him, but it might refer to his son, who then would have been Moses' brother-in-law. The point is, they're a descendant, they're related to Moses through his marriage to the daughter of the priest of Midian. On that day, Deborah and Barak, son of Abinoam, sang this song, and this song is going to suggest elements of the Old Covenant and their belief that, you know, God was involved in the violence that they enacted against their enemies. Israel's leaders took charge, and the people gladly followed, praise the Lord, or hallelujah. Listen, you kings, pay attention, you mighty rulers, for I will sing to the Lord. I will make music to the Lord, the God of Israel. Lord, when you set out from Seir and marched across the fields of Edom, The earth trembled, and the cloudy skies poured down rain. The mountains quaked in the presence of the Lord, the God of Mount Sinai, in the presence of the Lord, the God of Israel. In the days of Shamgar, son of Anath, and in the days of Jael, people avoided the main roads, and travelers stayed on winding pathways. There were few people left in the villages of Israel. Okay, an alternative rendering for that. No, not an alternative rendering, just the meaning of the Hebrew is uncertain. All right. So the rendering they give is based on the context, what they think it might mean. Until Deborah arose as a mother for Israel. When Israel chose new gods, war erupted at the city gates. Yet not a shield or spear could be seen among the 40,000 warriors in Israel. My heart is with the commanders of Israel, with those who volunteered for war. Praise the Lord. Or again, in the Hebrew, that would be Hallelujah. Consider this, you who ride on fine donkeys, you who sit on fancy saddle blankets, and you who walk along the road. Listen to the village musicians, again, the Hebrew is uncertain, gathered at the watering holes. They recount the righteous victories of the Lord and the victories of his villagers in Israel. Then the people of the Lord marched down to the city gates. Now, the rendering village musicians is based on what is said there later, because somebody is recounting the righteous victories of the Lord. Well, it was not unknown even at that time for there to be people known as troubadours, or people who would relate the history through music and poetry and music. So these people who are relating the history or presenting the news, perhaps, as they traveled about to carry news from place to place, were recounting the victories of the Lord and the victories of his villagers in Israel. And in the Hebrew mind, those victories were righteous. So it's a good thing that we're going out and killing people. Well, no, it isn't, but that's how they thought. Wake up, Deborah, wake up, wake up, wake up, and sing a song. Arise, Barak, lead your captives away, son of Abinoam. Down from Tabor marched the few against the nobles. The people of the Lord marched down against mighty warriors. They came down from Ephraim, a land that once belonged to the Amalekites. They followed you, Benjamin, with your troops. From Machir the commanders marched down. From Zebulun came those who carry a commander's staff. The princes of Issachar were with Deborah and Barak. They followed Barak, rushing into the valley. But in the tribe of Reuben there was great indecision. And that says, as in some Hebrew manuscripts, and the Syriac version, which reads searchings of heart. The Masoretic text reads resolve of heart. All right? So there are various versions of what that actually meant. So that may be seen as a kind of a dig against the tribe of Reuben for not helping. Gilead remained east of the Jordan. And why did Dan stay home? Asher sat unmoved at the seashore, remaining in his harbors. But Zebulun risked his life, as did Naphtali, on the heights of the battlefield. The kings of Canaan came and fought at Tanakh, near Megiddo's springs. But they carried off no silver treasures. The stars fought from heaven. The stars in their orbits fought against Sisera. The Kishon River swept them away, that ancient torrent, the Kishon. March on with courage, my soul. Then the horses' hooves hammered the ground, the galloping of Sisera's mighty steeds. Let the people of Meroz be cursed, said the angel of the Lord. Let them be utterly cursed, because they did not come to help the Lord against the mighty warriors. So this poetic recounting of the events, it takes time to put in digs against people who didn't help. Most blessed among women is Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite. May she be blessed above all women who live in tents. Sisera asked for water. She gave him milk. In a bowl fit for nobles, she brought him yogurt. Interesting. Then with her left hand she reached for a tent peg, and with her right hand for the workman's hammer. She struck Sisera with a hammer, crushing his head. With a shattering blow she pierced his temples. He sank, he fell, he lay still at her feet, and where he sank, there he died. From the window, Sisera's mother looked out. Through the window she watched for his return, saying, "Why is his chariot so long in coming? Why don't we hear the sound of chariot wheels?" Her wise women answer, and she repeats these words to herself. "Well, they must be dividing the captured plunder, with a woman or two for every man. There will be colorful robes for Sisera, and colorful embroidered robes for me. Yes, the plunder will include colorful robes embroidered on both sides." Making clear the selfish intent of the violence of those days. You want good things, so rather than go to the effort of making them for yourself, you go out and kill people and take their good things. Lord, may all your enemies die like Sisera, but may those who love you rise like the sun in all its power. Then there was peace in the land for 40 years. Judges 6. This is a more familiar story. The story of Barak and Deborah, Sisera and Jael, that's relatively familiar, but the story of Gideon is very familiar to most Christian children. It gets taught to the young people at a very early age. The Israelites did evil in the Lord's sight, so the Lord handed them over to the Midianites for 7 years. The Midianites were so cruel that the Israelites made hiding places for themselves in the mountains, caves, and strongholds. Whenever the Israelites planted their crops, marauders from Midian, Amalek, and the people of the east would attack Israel, camping in the land and destroying crops as far away as Gaza. They left the Israelites with nothing to eat, taking all the sheep, goats, cattle, and donkeys. These enemy hordes, coming with their livestock and tents, were as thick as locusts. They arrived on droves of camels, too numerous to count, and they stayed until the land was stripped bare. So Israel was reduced to starvation by the Midianites. Then the Israelites cried out to the Lord for help. I find it interesting, that mention of droves of camels. There's a game I like to play on Facebook called Tile Twist World, and they take pictures, either paintings, patterns, or photographs, and they put a pattern on them, and then the little pieces of the pattern get turned, and your goal in the game is to turn them back so that they form the correct picture. The tiles are in the right place, they're just not turned right. And you can use the fake money that you earn in the game to buy packages of puzzles or pictures that can be used. And I recently got a set that was animals. And the one I did yesterday was a picture of the treasury at Petra. Now, if you're not familiar with that, you might be familiar with the film Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. And you may recall that toward the end of that film, they rode through a very narrow rock canyon, Redstone Canyon, and they came out in an area where there was a very Greco-Roman building carved into the rock with columns and slanted roofs and everything. And they went through those openings, and then the ending part of the story took place inside that structure. The structure where they filmed that is the treasury at Petra in the country of Jordan. And there were camels on the ground in front of that, and that was the picture. The picture was primarily the camels, but you could see that building in the background, and it got me thinking about it. So I used Google Earth to get there, and Google Earth has street view pictures around that area. And when I got into the street view pictures, guess what was there in front of that treasury, that building carved out of the rock? Yes, there were camels. It makes sense to use camels in that area because Jordan is essentially all desert. So if you're going to travel in that area, it makes sense to use a camel. And so even today, they use camels to reach that structure carved into the rocks. It's quite a tourist attraction these days. And probably is even more of a tourist attraction after it was used in that Indiana Jones movie. That was back in the 80s, wasn't it, when they made that movie?
I don't know.
I think so. Anyway. They left the Israelites with nothing to eat, taking all the sheep, goats, cattle, and donkeys. They were thick as locusts. They arrived on droves of camels. We've read that. They stayed until the land was stripped bare. So Israel was reduced to starvation by the Midianites. Then the Israelites cried out to the Lord for help. When they cried out to the Lord because of Midian, the Lord sent a prophet to the Israelites. And he's apparently not named. He said, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I brought you up out of slavery in Egypt. I rescued you from the Egyptians and from all who oppressed you. I drove out your enemies and gave you their land. I told you, I am Yahweh your God. You must not worship the gods of the Amorites in whose land you now live. But you have not listened to me." And that's the word of that prophet, and that's all it is. He's not named. We just have that recounting of the message that he gave. Then the angel of the Lord came and sat beneath the great tree at Ophrah, which belonged to Joash of the clan of Abiezer. Gideon, son of Joash, was threshing wheat at the bottom of a winepress to hide the grain from the Midianites. Of course, that would have made it hard to blow away the chaff once you had threshed the wheat, because you normally did that out in the open so the wind could come and blow the chaff away, doing that job for you. So how he actually accomplished that isn't clear, but he was doing it so he'd be out of sight so he could have something to eat. The angel of the Lord appeared to him and said, "Mighty hero, the Lord is with you." "The Lord is with us?" "Sir," Gideon replied, "if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? And where are all the miracles our ancestors told us about? Didn't they say the Lord brought us up out of Egypt? But now the Lord has abandoned us and handed us over to the Midianites." Then the Lord turned to him and said, "Go with the strength you have and rescue Israel from the Midianites. I am sending you." "But Lord," Gideon replied, "how can I rescue Israel? My clan is the weakest in the whole tribe of Manasseh, and I am the least in my entire family." Well, God likes to pick people who aren't important in the world's eyes. And
He likes the downtrodden.
huh?
He likes the downtrodden
Yeah.
because
Some people say that is how God gets the glory, because he uses people that couldn't have done it on their own. Therefore, it's obvious that God did it.
they're the ones that are willing to work with him.
Well, that's possibly even more the case. The people who think they're pretty cool on their own aren't willing to let God be a part of their lives. They don't need him. The Lord said to him, I will be with you, and you will destroy the Midianites as if you were fighting against one man. Gideon replied, if you are truly going to help me, show me a sign to prove that it is really the Lord speaking to me. Don't go away until I come back and bring my offering to you. He answered, I will stay here until you return. Now, there are people who put forward a lot of criticism of Gideon for asking for signs. But isn't he actually just wanting to be certain? You know, when we encounter a spiritual influence, do we not want to be certain? Does not the New Testament tell us to beware of false prophets? That they're false prophets and teachers who will come and tell us things and use the Lord's name, but who would mislead us. So maybe it isn't such a bad thing that he's wanting to be sure that this is the Creator God calling him to take action. Gideon hurried home. He cooked a young goat, and with a basket of flour, the basket, an ephah, which they believe is about 20 quarts or 22 liters. Then, carrying the meat in a basket and the broth in a pot, he brought them out and presented them to the angel who was under the great tree. The angel of God said to him, place the meat and the unleavened bread on this rock and pour the broth over it. And Gideon did as he was told. Then the angel of the Lord touched the meat and bread with the tip of the staff in his hand, and fire flamed up from the rock and consumed all he had brought. And the angel of the Lord disappeared. When Gideon realized it was the angel of the Lord, he cried out, "O sovereign Lord, I'm doomed. I've seen the angel of the Lord face to face." "It is all right," the Lord replied. "Do not be afraid. You will not die." Now we've talked about this when we covered the book of Exodus. And the idea that the Jews had that it was inappropriate to see God face to face. And we read the story of Moses, who asked to see God, and God said, "Well, you can't see me face to face, but I'll put you here in a rock, I'll cover it up, and then I'll remove my hand once my back is to you, and then cover you up again." And he did so, and he declared his name to Moses there. And his name was Gracious and Merciful and Kind, and putting a limit on how far from generation to generation human toxicity would reach. But then there was that bit on Sinai where the people were told to stay off the mountain or they would die. Now also we have that incident where the 70 elders of Israel went up to the mountain. They saw God face to face. They ate and drank. So we've talked about that in the past. But what we're seeing here is this Jewish understanding of God as someone you can't see face to face. Well, it was the angel of the Lord. It was Jesus. And the purifying presence of God is, shall we say, masked in his appearance. He appears in human form, and so the purifying presence of God is not there in the sense that it would be. And so Gideon was safe in that presence, and so God tells him, "You'll not die." And Gideon built an altar to the Lord there and named it Yahweh Shalom, which means the Lord is peace. The altar remains in Ophrah at the land of the clan of Abiezer to this day, this day being whenever this book was written. That night the Lord said to Gideon, "Take the second bull from your father's herd, the one that is 7 years old. Pull down your father's altar to Baal, and cut down the Asherah pole standing beside it," that big phallic symbol. "Then build an altar to the Lord your God here on this hilltop sanctuary, laying the stones carefully. Sacrifice the bull as a burnt offering on the altar, using as fuel the wood of the Asherah pole you cut down." So Gideon took 10 of his servants and did as the Lord had commanded. But he did it at night because he was afraid of the other members of his father's household and the people of the town. Early the next morning, as the people of the town began to stir, someone discovered that the altar of Baal had been broken down and that the Asherah pole beside it had been cut down. In their place, a new altar had been built, and on it were the remains of the bull that had been sacrificed. The people said to each other, "Who did this?" And after asking around and making a careful search, they learned that it was Gideon, the son of Joash. "Bring out your son," the men of the town demanded of Joash. "He must die for destroying the altar of Baal and for cutting down the Asherah pole." If you're worshiping a false god and your false god gets maligned or blasphemed in any way, it is up to you to deal with it. So when you see people calling for punishment against someone for blasphemy, and this happens in a number of different religions, then understand that these people are worshiping a false god. If God is the creator, he is capable of tending to his own honor, and he doesn't need to hire you as a paid assassin to defend his honor for him. But that's what these people are doing, revealing that there's a sense deep within them that their God is not really a God and therefore has to be defended by them. So they want to kill Gideon because he destroyed their worship structures. But Joash shouted to the mob that confronted him, "Why are you defending Baal? Will you argue his case? Whoever pleads his case will be put to death by morning. If Baal truly is a god, let him defend himself and destroy the one who broke down his altar." From then on, Gideon was called Jerubbaal, which means let Baal defend himself, because he broke down Baal's altar. Soon afterward, the armies of Midian, Amalek, and the people of the east formed an alliance against Israel and crossed the Jordan, camping in the valley of Jezreel. Then the Spirit of the Lord clothed Gideon with power. He blew a ram's horn as a call to arms, and the men of the clan of Abiezer came to him. He also sent messengers throughout Manasseh, Asher, Zebulun, and Naphtali, summoning their warriors, and all of them responded. And then Gideon said to God, "If you are truly going to use me to rescue Israel as you promised, prove it to me in this way. I will put a wool fleece on the threshing floor tonight. If the fleece is wet with dew in the morning, but the ground is dry, then I will know that you are going to help me rescue Israel as you promised." And that is just what happened. When Gideon got up early the next morning, he squeezed the fleece and wrung out a whole bowlful of water. And then Gideon said to God, "Please don't be angry with me, but let me make one more request. Let me use the fleece for one more test. This time let the fleece remain dry while the ground around it is wet with dew." So that night God did as Gideon asked. The fleece was dry in the morning, but the ground was covered with dew. Now, I read somewhere where someone suggested that Gideon changed the test because he was worried that the first test was what would naturally happen. But that doesn't make sense. I remember somebody once talking about wilderness survival and people who go into the mountains to hike. And he said if we could only get the blue jeans off these people, we could save lives. Now, what did he mean by that? Well, he meant that denim, blue jeans, are made from cotton. Cotton tends to wick up water. They get wet and they get soaked and they hold to and cling the water. And then people, their clothes get wet and then they get hypothermia and they even die from that. What they would like to see the people wear in that setting is wool, because wool will tend to repel the water and won't get soaked. So wool clothing is better to wear if you're in a survival situation in the wilderness like that, because of that very property. So the first test that Gideon put up was the one that was against nature, because he was asking the wool to be wet and the ground around it to be dry. But he still wanted to be sure, so he asked God to reverse it, and God reversed it for him. And I'm looking at my clock and saying another chapter probably isn't something we can start. There's a lot more to this story, so I think we're going to break it off here and plan to continue next week. Now, another note. I did say that tomorrow is the last day of November. Today is what they sometimes call Black Friday, because a lot of retail outlets actually start writing their accounts in black ink when people go out to start buying Christmas gifts. So it's a big commerce thing, and so that's why they call it Black Friday. But anyway, that means that over the next week, I plan, it's not a guarantee, it's a plan, Lord willing, to prepare another sermon presentation, and we'll present that on the 7th. In other words, our next Friday night Bible study would be on the 6th, and then on the 7th we'd have a sermon presentation. So that's the plan, so you can figure on your own approach to things. And we will continue with the story of Gideon and the book of Judges in our Bible study next week. And until then, we say goodbye and God bless.